The curiosity of humans always makes us feel something special and haunting when we hear about abandoned places where only the remnants of past life remain. This is why the topic of ghost ships has long been fascinating, perhaps due to the intrigue of uncovering the terrifying reasons that made the entire crew of a ship abandon the safest place they had at sea. On November 10, 1955, Captain Douglas of the merchant ship Tuvalu sighted the MV Joyita in the South Pacific. The ship had left Samoa in the first week of October, and more than a month had passed since Joyita was last seen. Through his binoculars, Captain Douglas could tell something had gone terribly wrong aboard the ship. The MV Joyita was drifting heavily with its deck listing to one side. When it departed, there were 25 people on board, including 16 crew members and 9 passengers. But now, the ship was completely abandoned, only marked by the barrenness left behind. There were bloodstains, some medical equipment from a doctor, and signs that a mysterious incident had occurred, causing the entire crew to vanish. This raises the question, what exactly happened to the Joyita? Ghost ships. One of the earliest legends of ghost ships involves the name the Flying Dutchman, a fictional tale based on real events from the golden age of the Dutch East India Company. It originated from John MacDonald's account of a mysterious ship, gathered from his travels across various European, Asian, and African seas. Later recounts became more eerie and dramatic. These writings, such as those in A Voyage to Botany Bay by George Barrington, paint a haunting picture of a massive ship emerging from storm clouds, charging forward in a terrifying manner. Despite many stories being told about it, the accounts have always lacked solid proof of the ship's existence. No one who has ever claimed to see a ship like the Flying Dutchman has lived to tell the tale, except for vague writings recovered from history. However, the MV Joyita is not a tale of fiction. It actually happened less than a century ago, during a time when ships had advanced technology, internal combustion engines, and onboard generators. This makes its disappearance all the more mysterious. The troubled history of the ship. The Joyita was originally a luxury yacht owned by silent film director Roland West, who created famous silent movies in the 1930s. The yacht was about 20 meters long with 2 engines and was completed in Los Angeles in 1931. It was the epitome of luxury, with special features such as water tanks, large fuel storage, and even an automatic pilot. West named it Joyita, meaning Little Jewel in Spanish, in honor of his wife, actress Jewel Carmen. This naming raised eyebrows as their marriage was crumbling at the time, and it was widely known that West was involved with another actress, Thelma Todd. However, the public's admiration for the yacht was not diminished by these personal troubles. Joyita was a beautiful boat made of cedar wood, and West frequently used it to take his wife, his lover, and his fans on trips across the water. But the golden age of silent films gradually ended with the advent of sound recording and high-quality speakers. This led to financial strain for West and his wife, which further deteriorated their already troubled marriage. Their personal problems reached a climax after the mysterious death of West's lover. On December 16, 1935, a maid discovered Thelma Todd dead behind the wheel of her Lincoln car in the garage of Jewel Carmen's house. Given that both Todd and the involved parties were celebrities, the public followed the investigation closely. After discovering that carbon monoxide poisoning was the cause of death, speculation arose that she had been murdered. A conspiracy theory even suggested that West killed Thelma Todd aboard the Joyita, then brought her home and staged the scene to look like a suicide. However, the evidence was enough for the police to conclude that Todd's death was unrelated to the couple, and both West and Carmen continued with their lives. Sadly, their careers were both damaged by the case. West eventually sold the Joyita after divorcing Carmen. After changing hands a few times, the ship was purchased by the U.S. Navy for use during World War II. After the war, the Joyita returned to its original purpose of offering its owners luxurious trips on the water. The ship changed ownership twice before it was bought in 1952 by Dr. Catherine Luamala, who leased it to her partner, Captain Thomas Dusty Miller, a British sailor living and working in Samoa. Miller used the ship for various business ventures and eventually secured a contract to transport copra, dried coconut, between Samoa and Tokelau, the fateful voyage. Joyita's journey in the South Pacific was expected to last about 2 days, covering the distance from Samoa to the Tokelau Islands in roughly 41 hours, depending on the weather. The ship was supposed to depart on the afternoon of October 2nd, but the voyage was delayed due to an engine failure. Before leaving port, Joyita was fully stocked with more than enough food and medical supplies for a 2-day trip. There were 25 people on board, including Captain Miller, his first officer Chuck Simpson, a navigation officer, 2 engineers, 11 crew members, and a cook. The passengers included 9 people, notably pharmacist Bert Hodgkinson and Irish surgeon Andy Parsons. Unfortunately, the crew was unable to repair the faulty engine, and Captain Miller decided to set sail with only 1 engine operational. They left port in the early hours of October 3, 1955, expecting to reach Tokelau 2 days later. However, by October 5th, there was still no sign of Joyita. The weather was recorded as clear with good visibility, and no emergency calls were received by ships or rescue stations in the area. As hours passed with no sign of the ship, Tokelau's port authorities reported Joyita as missing. A search and rescue operation was launched by the New Zealand Royal Air Force on October 6th, using a Sunderland flying boat. Over 6 days, they searched nearly 300,000 square kilometers of ocean, but no trace of Joyita was found. Then, over a month later, on November 10th at dawn, Captain Gerald Douglas of the merchant ship Tuvalu spotted something in the distance in the waters north of Fiji. Upon closer inspection, he saw a ship in a distressing state, heavily listing to one side and drifting slowly. As they approached, the name on the side of the ship became visible, Joyita. Upon inspection, the crew discovered that everyone aboard had vanished. All of Joyita's lifeboats, including a dinghy and 3 life rafts, were missing. It's important to note that these lifeboats were not enough for all 25 people on board, should they have needed to abandon the ship. Signs suggested that the ship had been drifting for some time, as someone had rigged up a makeshift awning on the deck, something one would do if stranded at sea for days under the scorching sun. The ship's operational engine was found covered by thick cushions for some unknown reason. On deck, they discovered the doctor's bag containing surgical tools, a stethoscope, and several blood-stained bandages. Inside the ship, the radio was set to 2,182 kilohertz, the maritime emergency frequency. It seemed that those on board had tried to call for help, but why had no one received their distress calls? The ship's electric clock had stopped at 10:25, and the switches for the cabin lights were all in the on position, suggesting that Joyita had suffered a sudden power failure around midnight. The ship's logbook, sextant, navigation compasses, and even Captain Miller's gun were all missing. Too many questions remained unanswered, and no one understood how so many people could disappear without leaving any clues. What remains? The Joyita was eventually towed to Suva, a harbor in the Fiji Islands, where it underwent a thorough inspection under strict security. With the help of experts and more advanced machinery at the port, several new clues were uncovered. First, based on the greater accumulation of barnacles on the port side, investigators confirmed that the vessel had been listing and drifting for weeks. Although the ship's radio was still operational, closer examination revealed a break in the cable connecting the radio to the antenna, which had been painted over. This break likely reduced Joyita's radio transmission range to a mere 3 kilometers. Its fuel tank still contained some oil, and calculations based on the remaining fuel suggested that Joyita had been about 80 kilometers from Tokelau before it began drifting. Investigators speculated that the piled-up cushions on the right engine might have been used to shield it from water spray from the propeller. After the yacht began listing to one side, the propeller would have risen above the waterline, splashing water all over the vessel. If this theory is correct, it's hard to imagine the terror the crew must have felt as they suddenly drifted through the night with a failed engine in the vast ocean. Someone had also installed an auxiliary pump in the engine room, possibly to prevent incoming water from damaging our generator. Initial investigators had speculated that water entered the lower deck due to intentionally opened water valves to sink the ship. However, the more detailed inspection at Suva disproved this and found that a corroded pipe in the cooling system had cracked, allowing seawater to flood the ship. The investigators also found that the pumps at the ship's bottom were in very poor condition and clogged with debris, making it difficult to pump water out. The official conclusion was that Joyita's hull was still intact, but the yacht had not been maintained, or more bluntly, it had been left in a very poor state. The broken cooling pipe allowed water to flood the lower deck, and as the ship sank deeper into the water, the sole working engine could no longer provide enough power to keep it moving, leading to the drift. However, the investigators could not determine what happened to the passengers and crew based on the evidence they found. This is the question that continues to baffle the public. Imagine being caught in a snowstorm with a broken-down car, leaving you stranded. The safest thing to do would be to stay with the vehicle. Even if the engine dies, the car remains the safest place, and it's also the target for rescue teams once the storm passes. Similarly, in maritime tradition, abandoning a ship that can still float is unthinkable unless absolutely necessary. Experienced sailors know this well. Moreover, in the case of the Joyita, Captain Miller surely knew that it was nearly impossible for the ship to sink due to the cork lining in the hull combined with the empty drums in the cargo hold. So why did 25 people decide to leave the ship, the only thing keeping them alive in the vast ocean? Theories. Captain Miller was an experienced sailor, and some who knew him believed that he would never have agreed to abandon the ship in the case of the Joyita. This led some to propose scenarios where Miller was no longer in control of the ship's fate. The doctor's toolbox was found along with blood-soaked bandages, clearly indicating someone had been injured. If the captain had been injured and unable to issue commands, the crew and passengers may have panicked and decided to leave the immobilized Joyita for the lifeboats. But what caused Miller to end up in such a condition? Could a mutiny have occurred on the ship? Some people believe this due to tensions between First Mate Chuck Simpson and Captain Miller. Simpson had previously told acquaintances that he would never work with Miller again, and they were surprised to learn that Simpson had gone back on his word and agreed to take the trip to Tokelau with Miller. According to a theory proposed by John Harris in his book, Captain Miller, who was in debt, may have tried to complete the journey despite engine troubles. Perhaps after realizing the folly of his decision, First Mate Simpson and other crew members revolted, demanding Miller turn back. A confrontation ensued, someone was injured, and the crew abandoned the ship, with Simpson taking the logbook, compass, and a gun. Years later, in an interview with the Honolulu Star-Bulletin, a longtime acquaintance of Captain Miller speculated about the mutiny. The acquaintance claimed that Miller was bankrupt and therefore unable to choose his crew, forcing him to select members from another ship. These individuals were allegedly untrustworthy, with their previous captain having died under suspicious circumstances. A mutiny seems like a plausible explanation for the disappearance of the Joyita's passengers and crew, but it still leaves some questions unanswered. Notably, why did experienced sailors choose to abandon the ship, their only refuge at sea? Were they afraid the ship would sink? That seems unlikely. V.G. Boyvan, head of the ship survey department in Wellington, asserted this. A detail about a sunshade found on the ship led some to hypothesize that after drifting for some time, the ship encountered an island. The crew may have then gambled with their lives, attempting to reach the island in lifeboats. Unfortunately, strong currents may have swept them out to sea, where they were lost forever. Of course, there are also more bizarre theories. In the days following the ship's discovery, Many tabloids reported that the Joyita had accidentally encountered a Japanese fleet, and the crew had been killed. This claim was possibly based on 2 knives stamped "Made in Japan" found aboard. Some newspapers even claimed that Joyita's valuable cargo had been stolen, leaving only an empty shell of a ship. However, reliable sources reported that the ship was only carrying sacks of flour, sugar, and a small amount of dried coconut meat, nothing of significant value. Upon further investigation, the Made in Japan knives were identified as rusty relics that had been on board for many years. In February 1956, an editorial in the Pacific Islands sharply criticized the tabloids for supporting absurd theories and attacked the ethics of their authors. Despite this, baseless speculations continued to proliferate, feeding the public's curiosity. Yet, regardless of which theory is correct, it no longer seems to matter. The tragic truth is that the 25 people aboard vanished entirely, and not a single trace of the Joyita's passengers or crew has ever been found. Without the discovery of any remains, we may never know what truly happened.